I'm Margaret Greger here today to talk to you about the 7 levels of individual, group, and organizational effectiveness. So let's face it, we've had a really challenging 18 months with the pandemic, and now with the closure of or not really the closure of the pandemic, but supposedly reaching critical mass with having people have vaccines and or having had the COVID-19. So people are starting to go back to work. And if you were out at all the last 2 weekends, you've seen people are starting to come back and socialize and starting to go to bars and restaurants. And we're getting back to critical mass of people operating with and working together. So imagine coming back to the workplace on top of 18 months of chaos. Whatever you had going on in your business 18 months ago, 36 months ago, 9 months ago, is going to be ever apparent now, especially around the workability of people, process, and technology. Now, most of us got better at technology over the last year, but we're going to talk today about organizational effectiveness and individual effectiveness and group effectiveness and how we do a better job of working with our people, specifically in coming back to the office or in working in hybrids. So the lowest level of effectiveness is hopelessness. And in hopelessness, there is an inability to work towards or see a positive future. It's not like I choose hopelessness. I don't wake up and choose, oh, I'm going to be hopeless today. But with the amount of thinking that our brains do, the average person has, the National Science Institute says the average human being has between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts a day, and 85% of those thoughts are negative and repetitive. So when I wake up and experience hopelessness, I might not even know that I'm experiencing hopelessness. I just know that things aren't the way I want them to be, and I have no idea how to change that. Now, I might be experiencing that for myself, but what if me and the person I work closest with is experiencing hopelessness, and the person they work closest with? Now you have a whole group of people who have an inability to see or work towards a positive future. The other thing in this lower area, below the power and freedom line of the 7 levels, anything below the line is ineffective. When we are in a state of mind that is below the power and freedom line, we've got some negative chemicals or what is the word I'm thinking? Emotions and transmitters happening in our body that aren't helpful either. There's more cortisol, there's more adrenaline, there's more norepinephrine. It's kind of spewing through our body, and it impacts our ability to use our prefrontal cortex and think. So in hopelessness, it's pretty high doses. When we go up to fear, which is the next level of ineffectiveness, in fear we are resisting what is. We are either pushing it away or wishing we had something we don't have. But we're resisting what's happening, which means we're not present. We're in hypervigilance. We're looking out for almost certain attack or disappointment. We're in protection mode. So we all have this almond-shaped organ inside our brain. If you drill a hole from the top of your head above your ear, there's this little thing called the amygdala. The amygdala is our warning signal that we are in trouble. When we are operating below the line in a state of fear, our amygdala is shooting off warnings to us that we better be careful. So again, we're not present. We've got norepinephrine, we've got cortisol, we've got adrenaline, not only being released into our critical thinker, our prefrontal cortex, executive brain, it is also releasing into our internal organs, into our heart, stress. This is what we call stress. So that's the second level of effectiveness, but it's ineffective, and that's fear. The third is frustration. Now, when we get to frustration, we are still operating in ineffective, but we are at the highest level of ineffectiveness. So in frustration, we are fighting against others. We are pushing people out of the way. We've got annoia happening, anger happening. We are narrow focused on what we don't want. But there's enough energy in frustration where we're mad as hell. We're not going to take it anymore and we want to make a change, which is why it's right at the level of power and freedom. When we step out of frustration into courage, we have stepped over the line into power and freedom. So in courage is where we see, have faith, have hope that something good will happen. We don't know how it's going to happen, but we believe. And we give ourselves to that belief. So we are moving forward. So when I have an experience of courage, it's when I commit to do something that I've never committed to before or I've never done before. And I'm stepping forward and taking action. In courage, different kind of chemicals and hormones get activated in our system. We were in the low level thinking with adrenaline, cortisol, and norepinephrine kind of expanding as we go down this ladder. But when we go up the ladder, we've got our dopamine receptors. There's dopamine in our body, which is giving us a more of like a runner's high experience, or serotonin, where we are happier, or oxytocin, which is when we feel secure. So in courage, much more is possible. These positive chemicals, or chemicals that give us a better experience, allow us to open our aperture and see more. We have more faith, we have more belief in courage. So when we're in courage, we have the opportunity to go up a level into engagement. And in engagement is the opportunity to really be a contribution, to step forward, to step in, take action, enroll the people we work with. Let's make positive change here. Let's come back from this pandemic stronger than before. Let's have a better team. In engagement, there's a true desire to contribute. There's a natural ability to be inclusive, to think about diversity, to involve the people who need to be involved. Because in engagement, we are all working together towards a positive future. You can see not much room for frustration when you're in engagement. And what I tell people all the time is we've got prospects who call us up because my company does organizational effectiveness, specifically where we integrate people, strategy, and culture. Big deal. The human system is where Keen Alignment focuses. So people call us up and they say, we want to have an engaged, innovative staff. And I said, where are you right now in these 7 levels? And they almost always say they're encouraged. But when we do our ideal versus actual culture survey, we find out they've got a lot of people in fear and frustration. But sometimes when you're the leader of an organization, if you're not operating in fear and frustration, you might not be able to see it in others, or you might not even know what it looks like. So once you're in engagement, you have an opportunity to rise even higher to innovation. And in the 6th level of organizational effectiveness, innovation is about pulling out any stops. There's possibility in everything. There's no personal agendas. People are questing for, working towards, brainstorming for how can we raise the bar? How can we bust through the ceiling and expand our performance? How can we unleash the wealth of talent, capacity, and human spirit at work? That's innovation. And the highest level of individual, group, and organizational effectiveness is synchronicity. When we're in synchronicity, we as individuals and the group and the organization doesn't get so set back when things don't go their way. They look at, okay, this is happening. What are we going to do? Life has given us lemons. How do we make lemonade? In synchronicity, we have an innate ability, individually and as a group, to see possibility in anything that's happening. And we know enough and can see enough to help people that are below the line move up. So these are the 7 levels of individual, group, and organizational effectiveness. You can apply these to your own life. You can apply these to life with a team. You can apply this to getting your organization to break through the performance ceiling. In conclusion, I want to go over with you what happens to people in each level. So you've got the 7 levels, that's a model. Now you want to look at what happens in each level. So as I said, in hopelessness, we have an inability to work towards or see a positive future. Science tells us that people can only experience happiness 1 to 5% of the time when they're in a state of hopelessness. So imagine your company just lost your biggest client. Somebody key in your organization resigned. You have a brand new president or a brand new product and it's failing. You could imagine people would be in hopelessness. But if you don't understand what happens to the psyche in hopelessness, if you don't understand what happens to the human, then you can't certainly understand what happens to the human system. So when people are happy, they have access to more of their brain power. They can see more clearly. So when they're unhappy, they're looking at life through a little itty bitty scope, and all they can see is what's wrong. So that's hopelessness. My experience of hopelessness, I had moved to California, literally left everybody I know. One by one, the kids did follow when the time was right, but I sold everything I had. I sold my recruiting company in Illinois, moved out here in a U-Haul truck, 4x8, maybe 4x6, but I had almost nothing. Everything was in storage, and I came out here and I wanted to start conscious hiring. I made a deal, which now we call it making a deal with the devil, but it was my fault. It was my responsibility. I made a deal with someone to bring that software to fruition, and that person was not aligned with my values or my business partner's values. So when it was time to break that business apart and abort the launch the day before we were going live, I was in a state of hopelessness. I didn't see any positive future. I just saw the big mistakes that I made and the failure, and this thing was never going to come to fruition. And I remember laying in bed with the covers literally over my head, mid-morning around 11 o'clock, and my 22-year-old son at the time came in the room and said, he came home for lunch. He was working at that same company. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I can't get out of bed. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm stuck." He said, "Mom, the woman who raised me would never be stuck." And it was him who literally, through his words, pulled me out of bed. It's important to know when people are in hopelessness, they might not be able to get out of it alone. And if you're in hopelessness too long, you may be habituating depression, like developing a habit to be depressed. When you're in a depression and the depression lasts too long, you might need help from an outside resource like a therapist, more than a coach, to get out. So that's hopelessness. Let's move on outside of hopelessness to fear. Remember, we talked about hypervigilance. We talked about being in protection mode, looking for what's going to attack us. Well, people only have access to happiness 9 to 10% of the time while they're in fear. No access to happiness means no access to innovation, no access to engagement, no access to how do I be a real contribution. We're afraid, and we're afraid all the time. Now, sometimes that fear is given to us by a dogmatic leader who says, if you don't produce, by the end of the week, you're fired. Or sometimes that fear is habituated in us since the time we've been 5 or 7 or 13 or 19, and we just bring fear with us wherever we go, and we don't understand the negative adverse impact. Remember, the cortisol, the adrenaline, the norepinephrine are pushing into our body, into our thinking brain. So in fear, you can't even think straight. You can't see what you can do about fixing things in a state of fear. You also are under an immense amount of stress in your body, in your organs, and that's not good either. So in fear, you might be saying, well, how the hell do I get out of these lower levels? Well, in fear, that is a right hemisphere dominant trait when we are below the power and freedom line. In fear, a great way to get out of it is to make a to-do list, to tap into the left hemisphere structure of the brain, or to look at what am I really afraid of? What's the worst thing that can really happen? But it takes presencing that there is fear, that you are in fear. Maybe take 6 deep breaths, and then exhale, calming your nervous system. In fear and in hopelessness and in frustration, which we'll get to in a minute, your sympathetic nervous system, the thing that tells you when you might be in trouble, your sympathetic nervous system is on overdrive. You cannot calm yourself down from a place of fear. You've got to be reaching over the line and turning on your parasympathetic nervous system, which deep breathing allows you to do. The moment you take a deep 6-count breath and then slowly let it out, your system calms down. The chemicals calm down. You can see clearly. So let's go into frustration. And as I said earlier, it's the highest level of the ineffectiveness levels. Notice you're in happiness 12 to 22% of the time, which means you can see a little more clearly than you could have in fear. Also, in frustration, you're done. You want to make a change. You want something to change. So you start to think about, how can I fix what's broken? How can I fix what's broken? So in frustration, you'll notice that you start to see what's not working, that if it was, things would be different. So one of the other things, so frustration is a left hemisphere below the line. One of the things to do in frustration is tap into the right hemisphere. This part of your brain is the freedom, the part of your brain that sees other people, that can look into people's eyes and make a connection. So if you're below the line in frustration, one of the most powerful things you can do is get on the phone with someone and say, how do we solve this problem together? What can we do to fix this problem? Let's create a strategy. The next level, this is when we get into where the magic happens, is courage. Look at the difference between the happiness factor from courage, from frustration to courage. It's double. We're happy 55 to 60% of the time. We see a positive future and we believe. So for myself, the first time I rode a bike around Lake Tahoe without being chased by a truck was for team and training. And when my girlfriend Sandy said, I'm gonna do team and training, we're gonna ride 100 miles around Lake Tahoe, I looked at her and I said, well, that's great for you. I'm not doing that. By the end of the 1-hour conversation, we had me signed up for the Lake Tahoe ride, and I was excited. I had put training in my calendar. I knew I was going to do it, but I went from no way to hell yes in a matter of an hour. In that state of courage, I saw myself crossing the finish line. I saw myself raising the $4,000 I needed to raise for team and training. That's courage. So let's go into engagement. In engagement, we're happy 68 to 71% of the time. This is what everybody wants. This is what every organization wants. The only problem is most people don't tell the truth to themselves about when they're there and when they're not there. But let's talk about when we are there. We're collaborating, we're collective, we're bringing in the collective intelligence of the human system. We're creating new plans, creating new processes, creating new systems, creating new initiatives, and we're all in as a collective. That's engagement. Let's go up into innovation. Check this out. Happiness 79% of time, because we're engaging our prefrontal cortex, our creativity. We're working with others. We're solving a problem. In AA or any other kind of rehabilitation type of training or work, they say you want to get out of these lower levels, go contribute, go volunteer, become a sponsor to someone else, because you're tapping into higher levels of brain power where the brain and the body feel like they're making a difference. That's what's possible in innovation. Fix a problem that no one can fix or no one has been able to, and you will experience happiness, joy, even bliss. Let's go to the highest level, which is synchronicity. Happiness 89 to 100% of the time. Now, the truth is, even the Dalai Lama does not get up here as often as you would think, because he's dealing in the real world. But in this place of synchronicity, we have this almost magical ability to look at anything that's happening and look at it from a perspective of, this is here to teach me something. I can deal with this. I have the ability to deal with this. I'm aware and awake to what is and not addicted or trapped in those lower levels of drama. So if we can experience synchronicity 5% of the time, and we know how to get there, we can continue to raise our level of effectiveness. So this has been an introduction to the 7 levels. We're going to be doing live casts every week for the next 10 weeks about the 7 levels of individual, group, and organizational effectiveness. If you like what you heard today and you want to follow us, it's keenalignment.com, and I'm Margaret Graziano, or known as Maji. Thank you very much for your time.